Recording in progress.
Got it.
So, welcome everybody to yet another one of our Women's Club discussions. This one is a book review as promised, and I know I didn't tell you which books I was reviewing. That was partly because I was hoping that certain ones would come in time, and partly just because I like to surprise you guys. So I don't want anyone to have to feel like they need to rush and read whatever books that I'm talking about with the book reviews first. But all of these books were released this year. I'm going to be discussing 4. I didn't know much about them before I took them, other than that they were really well reviewed and I knew some of the authors. But the books that I'm going to be talking about are Haven by Emma Donoghue. So you might remember she wrote Room. That was one of her very, very popular books. And the last book that she wrote, I actually talked about at a previous review, called Pull of the Stars. We Should Not Be Afraid of the Sky by Emma Hooper. She also wrote Etta and Otto and Russell and James. That was her big one that I knew of. And she came out with another book a couple of years ago, but I didn't know too much about that one. I hadn't read it. Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Some of you may have already heard about this one. This one has been reviewed and being talked about, tons of buzz around this book, Lessons in Chemistry. Bonnie Garmus, she's an American author. This is her first book published when she was 64 years old, which is sort of nice with all of the wunderkinds that we often end up hearing about who are 20. Yeah. This woman has had a long career in copywriting, and she's a creative director as well. And this is her first novel. And then the 4th book that I'm going to talk about is called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It's by Gabrielle Zevin. This is her 5th novel for adults. Her most well-known one, I would say, is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, which you may know about. But this is her 5th book for adults. She also has another 5 that she did for young adults. And she's another American. Now, our first 2 authors, so Emma Donoghue and Emma Hooper, I'm including their books in Canadian fiction, in the heading Canadian fiction, even though Emma Donoghue was actually born in Ireland, in Dublin. She moved to Canada in '98. And so as Canadians, we just like to absorb anyone that we can potentially say is Canadian. She is a Canadian citizen now, but born in Dublin, moved to Canada. And Emma Hooper, the opposite, sort of, not entirely, but born in Canada, and she emigrated to the UK in 2004, but we still also consider her a Canadian. So Haven, the Emma Donoghue book, this one, I would say it's well, first of all, not that I would say it as in I'm making it up. This is definitely historical fiction. It takes place in 7th century Ireland, and it starts off in a monastery in County Offaly, which is on the River Shannon, and it's just after Easter. And it follows 3 monks. It's the story of 3 monks who go off on a pilgrimage to create a new monastery away from the sinfulness of the rest of the world. So what happens is, the beginning of the book is there's this guy, Art, who's a religious zealot, who has a dream that, of course, was sent by God about founding a remote retreat where monks can live purely away from the sinfulness of man. And in that dream, he goes out to find this retreat, this island that he's dreamed of, with a young monk and an older monk. So then he asks permission of the prior of the monastery that they're at, which I will not even make an attempt at pronouncing the name, lots of accents, very Gaelic, um, to take these two other monks with him to find this promised land. This book is very slow. It is very slow and sort of meditative. And even though the subject matter sort of seems like it might lend itself to adventure, it's three men setting out, finding an island and then like settling it and like trying to survive, right? Survival, that seems like kind of actiony, but it's not. So when you pick this one up, just sort of like, I feel like this is a better sort of winter, cooler weather read, just in the slowness of it. A lot of reviews seem to imply that that was a deal breaker for some people. But Emma Donoghue, if you've read her before, so like I said, she wrote Room, which is set in Canada, and it's the story of a woman who's abducted and held hostage by a man for years and years and years and has a child, and it's narrated by that child. And then she also wrote a book called The Wonder. It was also shortly, like she's been nominated for like 8 million prizes. And for Pull of the Stars, it like I think all three of those ones were on the Giller short or long list. She's an incredible writer, Emma Donoghue. She writes really beautiful descriptions. She looks at the motivations of each characters and explores them in ways that are, I know that some people can be kind of pedantic when they do that, but this is, it really feels like it gives you insight into the workings of so many different ways of thinking. So while this book focuses on three people, like the entire story really is these three different people, they're very different. So Art, our zealot, he's like middle-aged and very, very, very religious, but he's also very driven by a need for personal glory as well as religious glory. And of course, there will always be characters like that in the world. Then we have Trion, who is the younger monk, and he was given to the monastery when he was a boy. So he's been raised in the monastery with this idea of obedience and religion and Christianity. And then we have Cormac, who's an older monk, who he came to the monastery after his whole family was killed during the plague. His whole family was non-Christian. This was before he was converted to Christianity as well. So there's a really interesting dynamic between the three of them. And then another thing that is built up within is that vow of obedience that Trion and Cormac have sworn to Art. So then a lot of the story is kind of propelled through the questioning of whether they follow this obedience to a person or to their God, to their moral sort of imperatives. And it's this question too, because they are all religious, then they believe that Art's vision was sent by God. And so how to proceed. Anyway, it's like I said, it's not a fast-paced book, but it is a rewarding read. I would put this one in literary for sure. And like I said, it takes place in 7th century Ireland. This is not, I'm not sure about the rest of you, but this is not an era that I am very well acquainted with. And as with a lot of really wonderfully researched historical fiction, there's a lot of interesting information and sort of research paths to wander down on the internet or in books in the afterword. So the ways, for example, in which Donohue chooses to digress from the historical accuracies of the founding of this monastery, because it's sort of rooted in historical truth in that a monastery was founded on this small rocky island called Michael Skellig, well, called Michael Skellig later on after the 7th century. And, but this is not the story of how it really came to be. This is, she wanted to use her narrative to explore the ways that religious dogma affects these 3 very different personalities, along with the limitations that are placed on them from being isolated from everyone and everything else, including just like food, shelter. So when they first arrive at the island, that's Cormac, who's the older monk, is very practical. He has a background in masonry, and he wants to, start building shelters and gardens so that they can sustain themselves. Trian, the youngest, he comes from a fishing village, so he wants to start looking at trade routes and where they can barter for things they might need from other settlements. And Art, who's he's like the prior, he's the leader of it. He says that no, everything's sent by God, so God will provide. God will provide. And then they have to operate within those strictures because of these vows of obedience that Cormac and Trian have sworn to Art. So then the questions, where does the obedience really belong? To a man, to God, to what? And one of the things that it explores is where these obligations, like where obedience and morality, what do you choose when those 2 things are not the same to your mind? Anyway, it was an interesting read. And definitely, like I said, rewarding, especially in terms of character. She writes beautifully, and you can, I imagine, really, I felt really placed in the location. Her descriptions of place as well are really, really rich. But it is a slow read, meditative. Our next book, also historical fiction, is We Should Not Be Afraid of the Sky. Now, this one goes even further back in history. This one takes place during the 2nd century, and it takes place in Portugal. And it is inspired by the hagiography, which I learned is the story behind the lives of the saints, of Saint Quiteria. So Saint Quiteria, who I had never heard of before. I'm just gonna mute you. Actually, I'm just gonna mute everybody for right now. So Saint Quiteria, her religious story, her myth is really contested. There's not really a lot known about her, and I think that's probably partly why Emma Hooper chose her, because there was a lot of room sort of to work with a narrative story. So her story was that she was born with 8 sisters, and to a mother who at this time said that they should all be killed. They should all be killed because she didn't want it reflecting on her that that she was more like a kind of animal that would bear a litter of children. So she entrusted to one of her handmaidens to have the children drown. Now, this woman didn't drown them, and instead what she chose to do was she had them raised in a village all by different families. This is kind of the beginning of the story. So in Emma Hooper's version of the story, we have 5 sisters growing up in a village in Portugal, all raised by different families, but all knowing that they are sisters. and the story is told from multiple viewpoints. So 4 of the sisters die very early on in the story, and then different chapters are told from the perspectives of our remaining sisters. Now, Hooper said that because we know very little about women and working class people from that time, one of the things that she wanted to explore was both kind of the overarching human traits. So like think Shakespeare, why Shakespeare is still loved and current is because even though it was written centuries ago, it really illuminates different human traits that we still have today in our cultures. So she wanted to do that, to explore the overarching human traits, but as well as the magical ones that contributed to sainthood. So 3 of these sisters ended up becoming canonized as saints. That's I learned in my other reading. But one of the things that Hooper has said in interviews is that as a child growing up Catholic, she was really fascinated by the saints because she was taught that they were people like her, but also that they were magic. And so how to sort of marry those 2 things. And when she thought about those things, especially in relation to looking at saints from who were ostensibly lived so long ago. So again, we're talking about like in the 2nd century, we know a little bit about like there are historical records about leaders, about war commanders, during the Roman Empire, but not so much about common people and very, very little about what women's lives were like. So that's one of the things that she wanted to explore there. Now, Emma Hooper is also a musician. And one of the things is like, as you read the book, the chapters towards the end, the chapters and the different perspectives get shorter and shorter. And they're just like a few lines. They'll just be a few lines and then it switches perspectives and a few lines and it shifts a few lines and a few lines. And one of the things that she said about that was she thought that that was maybe her musical training coming out and that it was like these brief little staccato bursts before sort of the denouement of the story, which is interesting. Another thing that she wanted to see about was how it affects different perspectives affect the telling of a story. So similarly to in Haven, where we have Cormac and Treon and Art's sort of versions of events, we also in We Should Not Be Afraid of the Sky. I always get the title wrong because I want to say We Should Not Hold the Sky or something like that. It's a long title. And We Should Not Be Afraid of the Sky, we flip between the different sisters' experiences. And while they're raised by different families, they're always together. And they have certain similarity, the ways that they perceive things similarly versus the ways that they look at things differently really adds to a sort of fuller experience of everything that they're going through. It seems like this should maybe not be as fast to read as it is because it is very literary because it takes place in the 2nd century. But I found this book pretty action-packed and I found it quite a page turner. I think that the way that Emma Hooper has developed the story and the action that she has that sort of continues moving it forward, especially considering what very, very little it seems that she had to start off with in the mythology of Quiteria, it becomes a really quite beautiful whole. It's not the happiest book, but at the same time, there's joy. Like in it, I would. It's not a happy book, but if it's a joyful book, if that makes any sort of sense to you. I think it's funny that these 2 books sort of came up because they were both just very, very recently released. Because at the end of last year, there was another book that, again, wouldn't strike me as being sort of something that would end up on a bestseller list or in a to read list. Lauren Groff's book, The Matrix, or not The Matrix, that's the movie. Lauren Groff's book, Matrix. That one focused on the life of a 12th century mystic in a nunnery. And it just seems so funny that periodically in publishing, as in many things, like we get these sort of bursts of books that might not normally have seen, like they would seemed like they would be on sort of the New York Times list, and yet they end up there in terms of their subject matter. The third book is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Now this one, I'm calling it pop fiction. I'm not calling it literary fiction because it doesn't have that sort of meatiness that I would qualify as being a book of literary fiction. It's pop fiction. It's a fast read. It's light, it's sweet, but it's also not empty, like you might think with a word like pop fiction. So the story here is our main character is a chemist. The chemist is named Elizabeth Zott, and it takes place mainly in the early 1960s. Now, even though it takes place in the early 1960s, I'm not calling it historical fiction. Even though I know Bonnie Garmas did research to make sure that there were historical accuracies, this one, it's mostly the story itself that propels it as opposed to the time. Like the time adds some structure and some restrictions to it, but I'll get back to that. So Zott is a chemist when women weren't chemists, and she's a never married mother when that just wasn't done. And she's a pop feminist icon. This is our main character. She's a chemist, but then she becomes a pop feminist icon with her own cooking show. Because she's a woman and it's the 1960s, and how else is she going to become a pop feminist icon? So the story begins with Zott making lunch for her daughter, and she's including notes in the lunch like, play sports at recess, but do not automatically let the boys win. And it is not your imagination. Most people are awful. Her daughter at this point in the story is 4. But anyway, throughout the story, we flip a little bit back and forth from times when Elizabeth is working as a research scientist at a company called Hastings. And then we flip back to her doing her master's degree at UCLA. And then we come back to Hastings, where she meets and begins a romance with a fellow scientist, Calvin Evans, which eventually leads to her daughter. So after her work finds out that she's pregnant, and of course they know she's unmarried, she is unceremoniously fired from her job. And then she proceeds to make ends meet by taking payments from her former male colleagues to help with their research, which she is never recognized for. She is not credited for, but she actually always points them in the right direction for it. And so that's how she manages to finance raising her daughter and living alone. Until one day, after she finds out that a schoolmate of her daughter's is eating the lunches that she's been packing, she confronts the friend's single father, whose lunch-making abilities are clearly lacking. And it turns out that the dad is a TV producer who's looking to fill an afternoon slot. And he thinks that a cooking show with Elizabeth Zott, who he finds completely captivating, would be just the thing. You can see why I'm calling it pop fiction. Like, this is the way that the storyline sort of arcs. It's like a fairy tale, right? We have the very beautiful Zott. Of course, she's very beautiful. How else would she get a cooking show? She is very, very clever. She's very intelligent. And she has this perspective that through soldiering on and playing by the rules, she'll be rewarded. Now, I think that most of us can see these are somewhat fairy tale aspects in our lives today, let alone in 1960s America. But what happens is that Elizabeth, she's constantly faced with sexism, either from her coworkers or from the studio execs. So while she's working at Hastings, she's constantly helping her male colleagues with their work. She's not being recognized for the work that she contributes. She's constantly being denied funding for the work that she wants to be doing. She just keeps on going and keeps plugging away, even though she's underpaid and unrecognized. She holds tenaciously to the perspective that if she does everything right, and if she stays true to her own moral compass, eventually things will come true and come right in the end. And I mean, it's a novel and it sort of does. So like even at her, at the TV gig, while the producer who wants to use her starts her off on this cooking show, she doesn't read off the cue cards. She doesn't wear the skin tight outfits that they want her to wear. She wears a lab coat with a pencil in her hair, and she discusses chemistry while she's talking about how to cook and how to, make a nutritious meal, et cetera, et cetera. And because it's a live taping, then she gets away with it. And then it becomes popular and et cetera, et cetera. And throughout it, she soldiers on and eventually things sort of work out. So the compliments that I have to pay this book are not necessarily, they might seem a little dismissive, but they're not. So it's a light read and it is delightful. And Kirkus reviews use the word adorable as well for it. And it is all of those things. And it's not to negate the feminist elements of the storyline, because there is a lot in there about how, of course, like Elizabeth's grounding and why she does the things that she does, all are very much rooted in her scientific theory. And she's just like that. Essentially, prejudice in general doesn't make sense scientifically. The book is sweet and funny and it's touching. And even though it doesn't feel very rooted in like reality or like this really could have happened, it's a really enjoyable read and it's fast. Like you'll tear through it. And it's a great sort of like an aperitif almost, a little something to sort of read between some of the heavier books that you may be reading. Finally, there's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. So this book is about game design, video game design. Well, it's about video game design and friendship. Video game design and friendship and romantic love. It's about video game design, friendship, romantic love, growing up, family. It fits a lot in its 400 pages. I loved this book. I loved it. I did not think that I would, as soon as I found out it was about video game design, I did not think that I would be like that the main characters were video game designers. I did not necessarily think that it would suck me in like it did, but it very, very much did. Our two main characters are Sam and Sadie, and they first meet when they're about 12 in the hospital, and they bond through video games. So Sam's a patient there, and he's recovering from a really bad car accident where his mom was killed. And Sadie is visiting her sister in the hospital who has leukemia. And they start playing video games together, and that's how they become friends. Then we fast forward about 10 years, and they're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's at MIT for game design, and he's at Harvard for math. And they run into each other in a subway station where there's a big magic eye poster that they are trying to decipher. And that sort of is is where their friendship is renewed. So what do I want to say? I'm going to back up a little bit. So that Sadie gives Sam at this meeting, Sadie gives Sam a game that she's designed for one of her classes. And so he takes it home and he plays it with his roommate, Marks. And that then leads to him tracking Sadie down and them really becoming friends again and starting to work on games together. There's a lot in this book, and none of it feels though overwhelming. It's just that it really feels like a completely drawn picture of all of these characters, even if we don't meet them for really long periods of time. So while the chronological beginning to the story starts when Sam and Sadie are about 12 in California, most of the narrative starts when they're coming of age and finding themselves in Boston. So while Sadie is already designing games, she's also making like poor life decisions, as we all do in our, early 20s, late teens, in her personal life. And she has trouble socializing, which she always had as a child as well. Sam is at Harvard and he's met Marx, but he's studying math and he realizes that he's not really passionate about it. And through this meeting with Sadie again, then he kind of figures out what it is that he wants to do. So then the two of them start working at designing games together. And the ways that their families are implicated in this game design, the ways that their friends, sort of everything orbits around this shared passion that Sadie and Sam have for video games. And the way that I've always been a sort of like I played Super Mario and that kind of thing when I was a kid. And I'm not against video games, but I've never really understood the draw and the passion that some people have for it. And this book did a great job of explaining it, or one sort of side of it anyway, as well as integrating that into the lived lives of our main characters and the ways in which they support each other, the ways in which they challenge each other, the ways that their families see them, the ways. It was a beautiful, beautiful book. I think I'm realizing as I get older, I mean, I know that I say over and over again in like all of these meetings that I think that our relationships with books are very much like our relationships with people, that timing is really important, that sometimes something speaks to us for whatever reason. And I mean, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, I think a lot of the period of time too that the main characters are coming of age probably mirrored my own. So that might be also one of my ways in there to the story. But I loved the way that Zevin sort of illustrated her characters, including their flaws. I think that again, as I get older, I'm more interested in flawed characters than I am in the ones that just seem a little too shiny, a little too perfect. And I like it when the characters, when they point out each other's flaws as well as when they are able to recognize their own, because that to me is sort of a process that we all go through as we become more and more ourselves, as we in literary fiction, one of the things that we talk about are coming of age novels, and that period usually focuses on like the 20s, say like when people are in their 20s. But I have a tendency to think more that coming of age is this process that we shouldn't really ever end. Like, and that might just be because I'm in middle age right now, and that's kind of the way I see it. but this is, we should still be able to question ourselves and like explore our own motivations. And when authors are able to do that, which I find Gabrielle Zevin does really well, and it's something that I noticed a little bit with her, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry as well. If you haven't read it already, I recommend that one as well. But characters from different backgrounds with different reasons for doing things. And this is sort of brings us all around to all four of the books. All four of the books tackle various perspectives. The only one that's really, and even Lessons in Chemistry isn't really single narrative, but most of them are really exploring different perspectives of living in the world that they're set in. And I think that's something that we should all be questioning kind of regularly, because I think in one of Emma Hooper's interviews, she mentioned something about, some variation on, history is told by the victors, right? And we have to really keep in mind who's telling the story and why they're telling the story. And that in our lived lives, I think I may have gone over on this before in in other discussions, but in in our lives as it is, we can experience the same event with someone else and come out of it with very different interpretations of what happened. And I think that it helps to inform our empathy and our perspectives, our relationships, all of that, if we're able to sort of try and put ourselves in other people's shoes more often. Yeah. I'm unmuting. I'm going to ask you all to unmute because I see some pensive faces. And I'm curious where the pensive faces are coming from. Rona.
I love listening to you. I could sit and listen to you talk about different books all day long. You just bring such joy to it, and it makes me realize that reading is so much more than just sitting and reading. It's like such a learning experience. That's what you bring to it, and I really appreciate that. I also feel that when I hear these four books, I automatically want to read the one that I'm interested in. But I find what I've started to do when you talk about books is try and read the ones that I'm not interested in. And I think that's a learning process. Like certain ones, like I wrote down, like maybe the Haven, I'm really not that interested in. I'm much more interested in this Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. But I think I would read the ones that I'm not interested in, because I think that's what you should do if you read. When people say to me, why do you like a book club? Some of the books I don't like, and you have to read them, and you don't. But to me, and I say to them, like you say, coming at things in a different perspective, I say, but that's the beauty of a book club, to get you to read something you never would read, and to open your horizons. And that's what I got out of today. I like when you do this, because it makes me want to read things that I don't want to read. I don't know if everybody else feels the same way, because I can pick out one or two books that are my type right away, and this other one, the Lessons in Chemistry. But no, I think I'm better off reading We Should Not Be Afraid of the Sky, because I would never read that, That's how I look at it.
I hear you. I will say, which I always do, I know, that life's too short to read something you're not interested in. But this is the same thing. So when I picked them up, I didn't know really much about them other than that they were like the newest things that I could get my hands on that had been really well reviewed. So because of that, then I thought that it would be something that you all might be interested in. But same thing with me for both, like Emma Donoghue's, like it's set in 7th century Ireland, and it's about 3 monks living alone on an island. Like, I don't care. But at the same time, I've read Emma Donoghue before, and I know that her writing is compelling. So that's a little bit of a like road in there. And then with Emma Hooper as well, like 2nd century Portugal saints. But sometimes, like you said, like sometimes it's like, oh, great. And other times I mean, for yourselves, I would say if you want to pick them up and try them out for sure. But if you're reading it and it's not doing it for you, put it down.
Really? You really think that? And I feel that if I'm reading it and I don't like it, it's like I'm almost like a cheater. Like I should stay focused and read the whole book. No,
But what
you
if
don't
you
Not,
picked it
not
up?
anymore. Excuse
No.
me.
No?
Okay. Not anymore. I'm sorry.
really.
Okay. As I say, I'm on my way out. I'm in the winter of my life. I'm 75 and I want to enjoy. I'm not in school. I don't have to read it. So I just have to say Lessons in Chemistry is really cute. Even the dog talks in the book.
Oh, you
And
read
in a
it.
way, it's a bit of history of how women were treated in the 50s. Okay. And she had no choice. That was very interesting. I don't mind reading about World War II, about all the women heroes, and some books that are really page turners. But now I treated myself to mysteries and thrillers, and they were so enjoyable, and I just got lost in it. So instead of watching TV, I was reading. But is it Rona? I just have to disagree
Yeah.
with you. I cannot plow through a book. Why? Why would I mean, even in movies, I understand people don't like it. They could get up and get their money back. Well, I don't go to movies that often, but I will more often now at Cavendish because the seats are
No,
great.
but instead of saying why, I said like you should
Why?
get out of
Why
your
should?
comfort zone. Because
Good.
get out of your comfort zone. That's how I feel. My comfort
So
zone in books.
I would say
Yeah.
I'm gonna play peacemaker here a little bit and say that
We're
my
fighting.
my happy medium between those two is I think that of course I am of the opinion that we should try because this is, I agree with Rona entirely in that and something that I've said before with the read what you want books and I think of that as something different than the traditional book club ones. But one of the things that I think is that when someone talks about some book that they've loved so much that whether or not like it seems like it's my cup of tea, it's something that would not normally have gotten on my radar. And then it gets on my radar that way. And then to try it. And so this is what I meant, Rona, when I said like life's too short to read something that you're not interested in, is that while, like I said, initially thinking 2nd century Portugal saints, not something that I would be like, yes, that's definitely going to be my next read. I read it and I really enjoyed it. And I'm happy that I read it, even though it's not something that I would have necessarily gravitated towards right away. So in the same way that I think that there's room for both. But I don't think that you should have to force yourself to slog through a book unless
I feel like I'm sort of like failing myself. Like, come on, you should do
I
it.
got
Just
over
because
that.
it's not a stupid
Rhoda?
little romance, Jodi Picoult book or whatever,
I got over that.
Get out
I
of that
forgive-
and get into something more serious. That's how I feel.
I forgive
I don't feel
myself a
that way
lot
with
now.
TV and movies, but I feel that way with books.
I hear you.
Yeah, well, so I just feel I forgive myself and I say like, you know what, why can't I enjoy? Okay.
Yeah.
And
that's
one
a
thing I will
point.
tell you, the Lincoln Highway, okay, I have to say I plowed through it because it was a bestseller and there were so many, I'm on these Facebook sites and everybody loved it. And not everybody did like it. So I felt I wasn't alone, and I also go to Goodreads for synopsis. And because if there's a book that I'm not crazy about that I will not plow through, I'll read the write-up or the Goodreads, which is so, and then I just say to myself, like, who am I answering to? Okay, why am I so strict with myself? It's time to loosen up. Like, I understand where you're coming from and I respect how your feelings, but I'm certainly not on the same page as you. To use a pun.
Heidi has something to add.
I really want to thank Carol for her comments. I have been
I have been plowing through some German literature and I'm getting so tired of them. And I feel because it's in my, it's still in my library. I've never read them before. And I've just read Erich Maria Remarque, one of his books from the 45. And I thought, oh my God, those Germans, they are so verbose, and it goes on, it never finishes. So I'm really happy I can go back, because right now I'm reading something, it's called, what is it called? I don't know, some trashy kind of thing, it's a mystery story. And it's great. I finally can get through the book, because the other one, it took me 4 weeks to finish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really thank you, because as I say, I have to learn to say, okay, if you don't like it, just throw it in the trash.
Well, give
I'm
it
gonna
back. I
say
take
don't-
everything
I'm gonna
library.
say don't throw it in the trash.
No, I
To
don't.
the
I
book
used
sale.
But but two, to come back to it another time, because this is
Oh.
something that I know about myself anyway, is that something of like remembrance of things past, right? Like I can't just pick that up and bring it to the beach with me usually, but at the same time, I think sometimes when I'm reading it, like I just find myself sucked into the language. And even if it is kind of verbose and flowery or whatever, like it's just like, depending on where you're at, where your brain is, like sometimes you can
It's
get
well
sucked
written,
into it.
those things are well written. But, after a while you say, well, does this ever end? I took it to Stratford. I was 10 days in Stratford and I went to the theater and that was great. But, I thought, why am I reading this, So thank you, Carol. I really appreciate that. I'll take it to Renaissance next time, even if I'm only up to about 200 pages, because most of them are 400 and more.
All my books I get from the library. I'm just so lucky. They're all there. I'm also on the email for Indigo and Chapters. So they send me emails of what's new, what's coming out. So I go to check if we have it yet. And a lot of times we do. I'm shocked because it says suggest a purchase, but check first that we have it. And there's so many good books. So I get my 3 weeks. And then I got spoiled. And I started taking out 7-day loans because they were page turners. And then I was like in a hurry to read 1 and 2 books. I thought, wait a minute. So now I'm giving myself a break. And now I'm just reading books that I have for 3 weeks. So I just want to say the library is fantastic. But if you buy your books,
I'll take all the credit. I'll take all the
Yes.
credit because I'm the
You
only library
can.
representative.
I agree with you, Carol. I haven't had to buy any books for
Yeah.
book clubs. It's
Yeah.
a wonderful library,
Mhm.
wonderful.
I'd like to
And even
interject here that the books that you give to Renaissance should be given to the Cote-Saint-Luc Library for their book sale.
They have enough.
A little
I just saw
plug.
Justin.
A
They
little
have enough.
plug.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, but we're not accepting donations right
I
now
have
until
no idea what's
after our
happening now, but I do know that think of Cote-Saint-Luc first. Give them a phone call.
Okay, but Carol, can you hear me? I
Yeah.
saw Justin and somebody else asked the other day and he said, no, we're full up. Please, no more donations. Renaissance is a good place. Many people are benefiting from there. So the book sale is October 22nd and they have so many books. Yeah.
I like that this discussion has turned into a public service announcement for the library.
Can I just add something, if you don't mind? It's about book reviews. You read a book review, like you're saying, like I think Heidi, when she hears, like, how isn't it very subjective and personal? And like you're going to read a book that somebody said is fabulous and you think it's terrible. It's like a Broadway show, which is much more expensive. It gets wonderful reviews and it's the worst play you ever saw, or vice versa. It's terrible. It's got terrible review, whatever. But how much weight can you put onto a book review, a serious book review by a known book reviewer, like a New York Times or whatever? How do you know that they're telling you it's wonderful? And like Heidi said, she was reading these books. She She just couldn't. And I guess you too, Carol, you know. So what do you feel about that, Katie?
Okay, I
Well, I-
don't always agree with the reviewers, okay?
Yes,
And
exactly. How do
exactly.
you know?
I
So
don't
this
know.
is-
I don't be, sorry, because there are other, if you go onto the web, Google or Goodreads, there's also people who have read the book, like not
see what they
critics,
have to
just
say. Yeah,
people
I've
like
seen that.
ourselves, and they will be honest and they will tell you, okay, that
Right.
this is a
And sometimes
follow-up
it's
book. And
opposite from what.
absolutely, absolutely. Same thing with film, like you said, absolutely. Mhm.
Well, I
But
think
I
that
go to
there,
the best, sorry, I go to the bestsellers and a lot of times I'm disappointed. So,
Yes.
well, bestsellers, right?
I
Like,
find
so,
the bestsellers are usually the worst books. They're the
no, I
worst books.
can't say that.
well,
No.
this
Well,
is,
some
it
of
all
them.
depends, right? Because there's, I mean, it's all from like all the money that goes behind, like always follow the money, right? It's like
Oh, so
from the
that's it.
publishing industry. So there will be certain books that are pushed more, that are
Ah,
advertised
or
more,
like
Right.
everything
that
else.
are, they'll
Right.
have more advanced
right.
readers copies. So even on with Goodreads, the publishing
Mhm.
houses send out advanced readers copies for different titles, and they'll have more of ones that they really want to push and promote versus like others, right? There's also, of course, you have to look at the understanding and relationships even with like the big reviewers with New York Times or Washington Post or Kirkus. And like, I think I've complained about Kirkus reviews here,
Really?
where when I was a bookseller like 20 years ago, Kirkus was one of the like go-tos that I'd check to see like, okay, well, what should I expect? What can I, and they were really thoughtful, well written reviews. And I have disagreed with many of them in the last, like 10 years. But like you said too, part of it is going to be what you want to read. And, like I said, relationships, right? So like what speaks to you as well. So just because something is really well reviewed doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, like, for the average person, just because something's really well reviewed doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be something that you're going to enjoy, or that, but it also doesn't mean that it's going to be, just because it's on the bestsellers list doesn't mean it's poorly written, which some people think too, right? It's, even if it's directed at sort of a more mass audience, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad. So part of this, it's the balance. So why I chose books that were really well reviewed, that were newer ones, was because I'm looking to try and find a common ground in these book reviews for you guys as my audience, right? So something that a variety of different people might be interested in, but also that are hopefully of a kind of more of a certain quality, and also of a certain gettableness, right? Like, I don't want to talk to you guys about a book that was released by this tiny little publisher in, Ayr, Ontario, that they made, like 20 copies of the book that you'll never be able to get. I want to tell you about books that you might be interested in reading that you could also get from your local library, from your local bookseller, from wherever it is.
Katie, I don't know if things have changed. I used to be a book buyer for Eaton's, and the books that we bought were the ones that the publisher put the most money into for advertising, to push it. It didn't mean they were the best books. Those were the books that that particular publishing house said, okay, we're going to back this winner. And they made it into a winner by advertising. So some of these books that you read and they make such a fuss about may not be the best books, but those are the ones it's proven because the author was good in the past, or whatever, the timely topic. The other thing I wanted to say was some of these books, I have a new law, rule of thumb. I do 100 pages. And if they're after 100 pages, I find that it's just not gripping me. Either it's my mood, or I could come back to it. I did that recently. I wanted to bring up the name of the book and I can't remember it, but I read it and I said, oh no, I'm not going to do it. And then I couldn't find another book in the house. So I kept reading it and I loved it by the time I got to the end. So it could be your mood at the time. I don't know, your
Relationships.
lack of other things to read at the time, I don't know. But mood has, to me, has a lot to do with it. And 100 pages is my rule.
I
give
agree
it-
entirely. And I'm just going to add to that, that I have occasionally gone past the 100 pages. Now, I'll tell you when. And so this is my other thing, is that what I usually recommend before you start a book is to open it up at random, like somewhere in the middle-ish, and read a paragraph. If that paragraph grabs you, then start it from the beginning. If after 100 pages, you still don't want to know how you got to that, like how to get to that paragraph, how to get to that thing that grabbed you, then definitely set it aside. But oftentimes this is it, is that sometimes, like my timing thing, this is, I really think I'm a genius about this, that opening it up at random, you read a paragraph, is if it's grabbing you, then it's sort of assessing already the mood that you're in, the quality of writing that you're ready for, the storyline, like it gives you all of those little sort of tastes. And then if those tastes don't want to make you eat the whole meal, then leave it. You might want to eat it later.
My husband used to read the last chapter. And then if he liked the, can you imagine? I'm still
No.
married to him, but I mean, can you imagine reading the last
That's like
chapter
Harry.
and then going back?
That's like Harry from When Harry Met Sally. He always read the last pages
Yeah,
of the book in case he
exactly.
Oh,
died
really?
before he finished it.
Okay.
So he'd always know how it ended.
I just finished reading The Invisible Wall. And I started I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's written by a 96-year-old man who lived, it was written about 10 years ago. He was 96 when he wrote it, about his life living in England in the early 1900s, where it was an invisible wall. What Jewish people lived on one side of the street and the Christian people lived on the other. And there was like an invisible wall in between. And it was, when I first started it, I said, oh, I don't think I could do this. But then again, I said, you've got to do it. You've got, you can't give up. And I ended up loving that book. It was absolutely fantastic. I don't know if anybody else has read it, but it's very good, very good.
How did you find it? What made you choose
Well,
it?
I belong to another book club from my synagogue. And a lot of the books are, have that theme in it. And that's how I found it, because it was one of the books that, it's not like this book club. They tell you what it's going to be. Nobody really has that much of an input, or what you do, Katie, which I like what you do. And I started reading it and loved it. But after maybe, it wasn't 100 pages, it was less than 100, and I started liking it. But I stuck with it, and I feel like I broadened my horizons a bit,
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something, it's a bit of a tightrope to walk. It's that you don't want to, and I mean, I think I've said this before. I should probably stop prefacing everything that I say with I think I've said this before, because so what? But when I was younger, I would always read, like if I started a book, I would finish it. And there's a lot of stuff out there that is not good. There's also a lot of stuff out there that, like I said, like I eventually learned that for myself. If I read it right now, I'm not going to enjoy it. But if I read it next week, next year, some other time, it would really get into my brain. And then there are other books like, it's sort of like you're talking about too, Rona, where like I kind of forced myself to stay with, but I didn't entirely force myself. I may not have been enjoying it, but I kind of like, there were things that I wanted to know,
That's what you're right. That's why it probably happened.
One of those books that's coming to mind right now is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. Did any of you read that one? It's one that I would not say that I enjoyed that book, but there are scenes that come up in like regularly that they'll just pop into my brain. And I did read Freedom of his that I loved. And then so this is like, part of it is, it's like the quality of like the subject matter. It might be the subject matter that doesn't seem like it's going to grab you, but then the writing then sort of strings you along, or else like, and we all have these preconceived notions too of the things that we like and what we're like, oh, that's not my kind of book. That then if you try outside of your comfort zone, which is, I think, what a little bit what you were getting at earlier, Rona, is that like if you try to read something that's outside of your comfort zone, just like even if like if you all you ever read normally is science fiction, and then you pick up a book of literary fiction, and you're just like, oh well, you know, I wonder what these saints in 2nd century Portugal are.
I would never have read Matt Haig if not for the
Book club.
library. Yeah.
Yeah, the
oh
Midnight
my
Library.
God. I love him, and like it never would have happened. That's what I like about book clubs. And so that's cool.
I agree. And this will be my moment to plug our November traditional book club too, to say that it's going to be nonfiction, right? So the choices that I'm giving you guys right now, there is a clear lead. There is a clear lead, but if you haven't put in your requests yet, then do so. And I will let you know by the end of the month which book it's going to be. But that's it too, is that I find myself, I just naturally, I lean more towards fiction than towards nonfiction. I think I told you all last month I was on a nonfiction kick and read like 3 or 4. And then as soon as I got back into fiction, it was like I had a couple of other nonfictions on my books on my nightstand, and I was like, no. I went back to reading my narrative fiction. But yeah, it's good to, I think I agree that it's good to read things that are outside of our natural comfort zone every now and again, because it broadens our perspectives. And that's the word of the day for this particular book review: perspectives.
Mhm.
So let me just, I have to switch because I have to plug in to charge it. So I have to switch places. That's why I put myself on. So I'm standing here near the kitchen door. But I just want to say to Rona that I did change genres because I never thought I liked mysteries. And I don't know how I just started to get into these. I don't know the difference between mysteries and thrillers, because even one of the authors said there really isn't that much of a difference. And I never read mysteries or thrillers up until maybe 3 months ago. And I found I liked it. So I have to say I did what you said, change genres.
Get out of your
Now I'll
comfort
go
zone.
back. Exactly. But it was just so pleasant. It was just so much fun. I was reading one after another. Yeah. So I'll have a long list for you in November when tell us what you read. I have to go through my history.
That's October. October is
okay.
going to be our read what you want. I like the read what you wants after the book review so that I can give myself a break.
Yeah, sure.
And give
I
us
like
all
to
a
hear-
break before we all start having to slog through the one book that we can all talk about together.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So
I
that
don't
will
think
be for
it'll be a
November?
slog though. Pardon?
It'll be for November. A book we're gonna have to read will be in November.
Yeah. So the November book club is going to be the traditional book club. So we'll all read whatever book that I'll announce at the end of the month. And at the end of this month. So I'll send out an email before the next meeting. And the next meeting will be read what you want. And then in December, it'll be a book review. So another book review. And I will tell you, the next book review is going to be a little bit of a lecture-y kind of one, I think, that I'm going to do. And I'm going to talk about romance novels.
Oh, that's good.
I think I talked to you all about this a few months ago, how this idea that I had about talking about like kind of breaking apart romance novels, and it's just not left my brain. So that's what my next review is going to be. It's not going to be newer releases necessarily. It's going to be sort of looking at the genre.
Hello?
My
Like a
perspective.
Nicholas Sparks and Jacqueline Suzanne. That gets me. They one book after another, and they're so bad. That really upsets me. That's not what book, right? You know what I mean?
Well,
Do
there's
you think they get paid by the word?
Yeah, you know what they say, oh, in 2 weeks, right, we want another book in 2 weeks, and then we want another one in 3 days, and that's what they do, they push them out, you know, terrible. I
Well, I'll
hate
tell
that.
you that at the moment, Nicholas Sparks does not factor into
Yeah.
my little talk that
Ah,
I've been
okay.
working on.
The
But
Notebook, oh, that I like. The Notebook.
well,
The only one.
maybe see this is the thing with different authors, right? And sort of like what Carol Blank was saying earlier about with buying for Eaton's and what publishers push is that
That right?
once one thing is successful, and I like that you mentioned, Carol, too, like whether like the timeliness of the subject matter as well. Like I know that I mentioned the 3 books, Matrix, and then we shall not hold, it's not we shall not hold up the sky, we should not be afraid of the sky, and Haven, kind of all in one group, because they're all sort of Christianity, religious, early centuries sort of focus, which is it just seems like a weird kind of subject matter, and yet those all seem to have been they've all come out in the last year, in the last 12 months, these 3, and they've all been like vaunted, which is unusual, right? So similarly, Emma Donoghue's last book, Pull of the Stars, we're talking about timeliness of books. So Pull of the Stars, the whole action, the whole narrative of that book takes place in Dublin in like 1918 during the flu epidemic. And she had started writing it years before the pandemic started, but she wasn't like, it wasn't originally scheduled to be released in 2020 until like then we get hit with the global pandemic. I mean, there is a real timeliness to that, right? So depending on when something comes out, how it's promoted, how it's like the same as if a particular author suddenly becomes, you know, gets media attention for whatever reason, then it's probably a good time for a publishing house to release one of their books if they've had it in their back catalog, because it'll make money. Name recognition means something. Yeah.
Of course. Pull of the Stars, what was that about? I think I read that one. Was that
I
one
think
of
you
the
might
big-
have too. So it takes place in Dublin in like 1918. It's in it's like, is it in a hospital? Like it's in a what is it, a place where babies are being born, a maternity ward?
Yeah, I don't know
And
if that.
yeah, and it mostly, from my recollection, it's like 3 main characters. There's like the main sort of
I don't know.
nurse,
Maybe I
doctor,
read
like
that.
midwife, that's the word I was looking
Oh,
for.
But
And
it's a good book. You recommend that?
yeah, it
Oh,
was good. Yeah. I like her. I like Emma Donoghue, and she keeps writing
Yeah.
books that I don't think that I'm gonna like. And then I read it and I was like, oh yeah, I like her writing.
How much does the cover of a book influence people to take
A
that?
lot.
Amazing, isn't it?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's why publishing houses spend so much money on them.
I find
And
that
it's so
I disagree, not for me. The cover means nothing to me. Matter of fact, I'll have to repeat what I said. I couldn't believe Forest of Vanishing Stars, she's wearing a coat. And
yeah.
I think I mentioned to you before, the editors,
That coat.
first, yeah, has nothing to do with the story. So she made this cover, and they went back to the author, and she had to put in a certain paragraph or 2, not even a page, how she found a red coat. And it had, in the forest,
really?
it had
Oh my
nothing
God,
to
that's
do.
like cheating. That's cheating.
Exactly.
You know?
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
But think too of like the different books that come out that have either really similar titles, like The Girl from Berlin, The Girl from Valetzos, The Girl from, and the other books
The
that have
girl
like,
on the train, the girl on the train.
mhm, and
No.
the other books that have really similar cover pages, book flaps, because like, again, it's that for humans, right? It's just like, think of it's purchasing power. So it's like, it's that name recognition. It's like, oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think that's supposed to be good. Oh, I remember seeing that somewhere else. And so they pick it up. I remember seeing that. I remember hearing that. I pick it up. It's sort of
Nothing
the
is
same
honest
as with baby
anymore.
naming, right? Like people, like generations, like they name all their babies the same names because it's just like, yeah, that sounds like a good name. Oh, I like that one. What can I say? No rhyme or reason. Or well, lots of rhyme and lots of reason either way. Well, all we're coming towards 12 o'clock, but I'm happy to stay on if we want to chat a little bit longer. What do you think? Any of those did any of those books sound well, Rona, you said you're gonna try Haven, even though it doesn't sound like you want to.
I really
With
gonna
all due respect, Carol, with all Carol Rabinovich, I love you, and with all you, and I really admire you. I'm still gonna go to the book I do not have any interest in.
I'm really gonna try the 2nd century Portuguese thing because
too,
I
Heidi.
think that sounds really
I'm
interesting.
gonna, what are some of those horrible
Yeah.
German books? Tell me, and I'm gonna definitely try and read that.
Yeah,
No,
try
I'm
it.
not going to.
The Emma Hooper is good. Like all of them are good. I will tell you that all of them are good, but whether or not you'll like them is something else. Because this is like Carol was talking about Lincoln Highway, and Lincoln Highway blew me away. Like
You loved it. Really?
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be reading it. It's like a really the book to read. Most of the book clubs have it now.
He's
Their book.
Amor
Not
told.
so great. Not so great. His other
Did
book.
you, Carol Rabinovich, did you like Gentlemen in Moscow?
Oh, that's the best book in the world.
Nope.
Really?
That's
But,
one book I bought and I kept. It's amazing.
So that's
Okay,
the
really?
same
Well, I
author,
must write
Heidi.
that
It's the
down.
same
Gentlemen
author who
in
wrote that one.
Yeah, but I
Okay.
didn't like his second one. There's one in between, and I didn't
No,
like. No.
first one, Rules of Engagement.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Okay.
Rules of Civility.
Yeah, I
The
didn't
Human,
like that at
that
all.
was my favorite. The Humans. I couldn't believe it was the same author. First
No,
I
that's
picked up
Matt
the-
Haig.
I went,
That's Matt Haig, yeah.
oh,
The
sorry,
Human.
right. And I
No,
didn't
no.
like Midnight.
He
Library.
wrote a second one, and I didn't like it at all. I think it was I read it second, but the
Rules of
Gentlemen in
Civility
Moscow,
was his first
well,
book.
of course, I was born in 1938. I lived in Europe, and I knew all these Soviet leaders and everything. So I thought it was so well done. The way it was written to bring these people in, I thought it was amazing. Yeah.
Carol Rabinovich, did you like Gentlemen in Moscow?
No,
Did you like Rules of Civility?
I didn't read that.
Okay.
I don't know.
What's better? What do you recommend between those two?
Well, see, I loved all three. That's I say Immortals. Yeah, he did like the hat trick for me because I read Gentlemen in Moscow first, like Heidi, and then I read Rules of Civility second, though that's his first book. And then I read Lincoln Highway, and I loved them all.
Really?
But I also didn't read any of them back to back. Like I had time between. I think I found them all different enough from each other that I could look at them independently. Yeah. But I'm not sure if I would have felt differently if I'd read them back to back. But I loved all three of them. I don't have a favorite exactly, except that of course right now Lincoln Highway, just because I read it more recently. I think that probably, and I think that, I mean, Rules of Civility might be it's probably like slightly lower down than the other two. But I mean, it was also his first book, so I still really enjoyed it.
Well, you see,
Just like,
I wrote The Gentleman in Moscow and his first book back to back, and I think that was probably a mistake.
because your expectations are here, right?
Yes, and I didn't like it. And I
Mm.
haven't read the Lincoln Highway because I didn't want to fall into the same trap. You know, it's what I didn't like because I liked this gentleman. But you see, The Gentleman in Moscow for me was really, I mean, a life story that I had lived in a way. And I think that made the difference.
Mhm.
Now,
And definitely
knew
rules
all-
of sorry.
I knew all these characters. I mean, I remember Kennedy and Khrushchev in Vienna because I was living there, you know, and I knew exactly where they met and how Khrushchev's wife
Familiar
peeled
to
an
you.
apple for Kennedy and cut it up for him and stuff like that. So it really made, and the way he moved the things together was amazing.
Mhm.
I really loved it.
And this is like, so Gentleman in Moscow, like all of its action, all of the story is based in, you
In
know,
the
in and around
hotel.
Russia, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with like Rules of Civility and Lincoln Highway, they're very Americana. Like they are very, very rooted in
Yeah.
America. And so they have very different flavors to them already, as like just in terms of place setting. But I would say that he does what he showed amazing ability of in Rules of Civility, which was really that, again, for me, it's characters. It's the way the characters are drawn. It's always going to be, that's I think what it will always come down to for me in terms of my favorites. He did a wonderful job at really fleshing out these various characters. And while with Gentleman in Moscow, it was a lot more centrally focused. Lincoln Highway digresses again. So we don't really have just one main character and all of our characters' perspectives. Like, I guess maybe that's a new thing too, or maybe not a new thing, but something that's very de rigueur nowadays of like alternating perspectives in chapters. So like all of these books, like I said, they also do that. And Lincoln Highway does that as well, where each chapter is told from someone, a different character's perspective.
I used to think that unless I read a book that I could not put down and had to sit and do nothing, just read the book, that to me, it was a wonderful book. And I find that now I don't find that. If I put it down and think about it and then come back, it's like a different way of reading, I find, you know, you don't have to just, doesn't have to just be a page turner. It has to have meat in it, you know, that's what I find.
It's true, but there's also something, again, I liken books to people, and I also liken them to food, because sometimes you just want to inhale it, you know, like you taste it, it just tastes like more and you can't put it down and you overeat and you hurt yourself. But there's something great about that too, because it's just like afterwards and your eyes are sort of crossed and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and you should have gone to bed at 10.
Exactly.
I had that happen to me the other night, and it wasn't even that great of a book. I just was really, really immersed in the story. And I just was like, I told my husband, I'll be up in just a little bit. This isn't going to be one of those nights where I fall asleep on the couch. And I didn't fall asleep on the couch.
Those are the books you forget.
Until 3.
Those are the books you forget quickly.
Yes.
The one they don't stick with you, you know, you just
because
forget.
you don't give yourself time to consider them and to actually,
right.
It's like sitting down to a meal
Exactly.
that you enjoy and sitting down to a meal that you inhale.
Right, exactly. That's very, very well put. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I got to leave. I have another appointment at 12:30. So I got to go. Thank you very much. It was very, very, very good. Thank you.
It's always a
excellent,
pleasure.
excellent.
It is always a pleasure. It is lovely to see you all. Thank you again for being so understanding about the delay. And I
Oh,
think
please.
the recording probably worked, so you'll all get to listen to all of our talk again and again and again.
Okay.
So we
thank
have
you.
another date, right? We have another date in October. We have the
Yes.
October date, right? Yeah.
Yes, in October, it will be, I should probably have this ready too the next time.
The
That,
first Tuesday, probably.
The second Tuesday, I
Or the
believe.
second Tuesday, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so, oh,
Is that
No,
the
I-
11th?
I
Is
think I
that
have it
Tuesday,
written
the
down.
11th?
maybe. I don't have my group up.
I think you
Here
can
we go.
keep me out because it's a Jewish holiday.
Okay. Oh, the 11th is?
Yeah, it's
That's
Sukkot.
the read what you want.
Oh,
I thought I was missing it. Sorry, I thought I managed to miss all of the holidays.
Well, if you have it then and you record it, then we can take advantage of it.
I can have it and record it, but I think that most people probably won't be able to come. I'll send another email out seeing if we
No,
want to
you know
move it.
what? It's quote a secondary holiday for most.
Oh,
and
yeah?
oh.
So
Is it
if you're not
Yom
observant,
Kippur?
it won't affect
It's
you.
not Yom Kippur?
No.
Oh.
It's Sukkot.
Oh,
Okay.
Sukkot.
Yeah, that's, I think that maybe, yeah, when I did the schedules, I did look for, I knew or I didn't know. I was pretty sure I was missing the high holidays, but
Yeah, well,
Um,
the high holidays you've missed, you're fine on that.
okay. So that's right now for our schedule. We've got October 11th is a Read What You Want book club. November 8th is the traditional book club where we'll all read the same book. And I'll announce what book it will be by the end of this month. And December 13th is going to be another book review. And I've told you guys I shouldn't have added it in the recording. It should have been an Easter egg. But for December 13th, it'll be a book review. And I think I'm gonna talk about romance novels.
So October 11th, we just talk about a book we've read. Is that what we do? Everybody comes with a different book. Okay.
Yep. Whatever books that you feel like we should know about, put them on our radar. It
I
brings my,
Nicholas Sparks.
bye
Thank
Heidi.
you, Katie.
Bye,
Shana Tova,
Carol.
happy holiday and everything. Good year to everyone.
Thank you, and same
Yeah.
to
Two.
all
Yeah,
of you.
best of
Happy
the holidays.
You.
happy
Good health.
holidays.
Thank you, Katie. It was wonderful as
Thank you.
usual.
Thank you,
Yeah,
and
thanks. Thanks, Katie.
bye.
Katie, it was
Bye.
great.